Tell me how you like to start practice. How do you get players set up for a good skate, good session?
I mean, it depends on the players. It depends on the players. On if it's you mean like in a team setting?
Well, I'd be curious because I know I've heard, particularly if you're working with a team, let's use that as sort of the example. But, I've heard some coaches say we jump into a game, it's competitive. Others will say, we get the edges going and maybe more isolated stuff. How do you find players best respond to get them engaged early?
I mean, I think as is anything, doesn't matter what you're teaching, whether it's hockey or athletics or not. I think everything's dependent on the player. Some players like to go right into it right away and they're dialed. I think I find most often in the hockey setting, players are used to just like easing into it, going around shooting pucks, and then getting engaged. Even look at most practices. How often does a coach have to stop the first drill to be like, guys, dial in here, let's get going? You know what I mean? Let's restart. We're 7 minutes in, but let's start right now. So I'm more of a kind of like to ease into it. I'll never have, let's say, the toughest thing that we're doing at the beginning, or the thing that's the most detail oriented at the beginning. Doesn't really matter for me the age. It's always going to be kind of building up generally. And it doesn't necessarily mean building up as in like intensity or speed, but probably more like on the mental side, the details aspect of it. And then with kids, and I shouldn't say just with like young kids, but like a game is a great way to do that, because everybody obviously loves a game. So those are little ways, whether it's a little competition or if it's a bigger group, a game. But yeah, for me, it's like generally started off kind of a little bit lighter and then ramp things up as you go.
Do you generally approach a skate with saying, hey, we're going to focus on a skill or a couple of details within a skill, or do you maybe try and touch on a number of things within a skill session?
Against the setting and the situation, it's very dependent. Let's say we're lucky enough to have an academy where we work with the kids 4 times a week. So yes, there'll be lighter skates for sure, things that are kind of just broad ideas or concepts. But for the most part, there'll be things that we're keying in on that session, whether it's a transitioning or just awareness or puck stuff, doesn't matter. And then really focusing on that in everything we do. Maybe a little bit in the junior, the pro level, it's a little bit more like guys just need touches, or they're coming off an off day or coming off an injury. Do you know what I mean? Or it's a pregame skate.
Yeah.
So it's more just like getting guys touches. So it's doing a couple different things. I think as instructors, as coaches, as skill guys, whatever you want to call, guys like me, I think you always kind of know who you're working with and gear towards the things that they need most. If a guy has a great shot off one side, or if he can't pick up a backhand, I'm always going to try to do something, whether he knows it or not, that is working towards something that he needs.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that we're kind of like in hockey moving towards, like, I just think of like in baseball, for example, like every new Major League Baseball park, they put a batting cage in the dugout. So players are going and they're taking swings between innings. We see that in football, for example, like the kicker's got to stay warm and gain that feel. Do you think that there's probably part of this where, your role, it's important in the sense of like, hey, we're adding details or developing the skill, but part of it's also like, hey, we just want to make sure when a player gets a laser beam on his backhand in a game that he's not going to bobble it, that he just maintains that feel throughout a season.
100%. I mean, no one's, let's say you're in a super detail session or just in like kind of a pregame skate, and you give a player a bunch of feedback. Nobody's going into the game thinking like, oh man, I got my hands here to pick up this backhand.
Yeah.
Or it's gonna blow up. What happens in practice and skill sessions, especially skills sessions, is you get to go again. Hey, you blow that up, go again, go again. And then what generally happens is like, or even in a practice setting, you mess up a pass and coaches do it again. And then what happens the next time? Very rarely will you mess it up again because everyone's watching and you're like kind of a little bit upset. You know what I mean? Well, I'm telling players all the time, like, why do you not have that same level of interest in picking up the pass on the first one? Because you're lackadaisical and you can go again. And then you miss a second one or a rim. And then you miss a third one and you're like grinding your teeth and like, kind of upset. Well, why don't we have that same level of like, I don't want to miss this pass on the very first one? So I do think, because and like going back to your question exactly, is like, I think it's muscle memory. They're not thinking when they go down the ice and pick up that cross cross ice, I go, my hand's got to be like this. So it's a sense of like it has to happen so many times. The other thing to look at that is that cross ice pass is like everyone's different. We're never going to replicate exactly what they get. The ice conditions, the angle the pass is
Sure,
coming
that's a
from.
great point. Yeah.
Did they have to throw a sauce? So even in a session for me, I throw more bad, players that work with me will make fun of me. I throw more bad passes than anyone, some on purpose, some because I mess up, but we can go down. You're never getting that thing. So even if I have a pile of pucks and we're doing a setup, a drill, whatever you want to call it, I'll be moving around as I'm making that pass because there's just no reason to pick up the exact same. And even if I did stand still, it wouldn't be the exact same. It would bounce a little more. It would be a little harder. It would be a little softer. It'd have a little more spin. But the more I think players check out a little bit when they get into like the sequence, the pattern. So I want to change it up as much as I can so that they do have to alter the position of their hands, or they do have to change, the angle of their stick a little bit, and not have, let's say, the monotony of doing it the exact same way every time, just because that's probably not going to work for those elite guys.
That's really interesting. So just take me through that. So you're saying like if it's somebody like just a basic catch and release drill. So I'm just hearing that it's almost intentional that we got to create some sort of variance within the same drill that's moving where the puck's coming from, maybe bobbling a puck. And
Totally.
you know what? I always remember that like Mike Johnson, who's with the Portland Winterhawks now, and he's spoken at our bench a bunch of times and been on this show. But when he was with Pittsburgh, I always remember him sharing a story. I think it was here, and it was basically he's like that was one thing that jumped out to him about Crosby working with him right away. It's like he asked for bad passes. He asked in practice to be in environments where he had to kind of react on the fly a little bit and really just he had that, I guess, just as an out, recognize that was an important part of the training. He had it. He wanted, and I think the way he kind of described it was like he wanted the environment to set him up to fail, so he had to figure it out. Like if he came out to a practice and it was just like on a platter for him, then he just recognized that wasn't making him better.
Totally. And I think he's probably not a guy we can compare normal people to, Crosby, because I totally agree with you, but he's so extra and he's so detailed.
Yeah.
100% agree with you. But there's nothing more frustrating for me. Like, let's say at the youth level, when a parent or a kid's like, well, he's not very good. Let's say we're at a program where you don't get to pick all the kids that are out there. Well, they're not very good, or they're not as strong. They don't pass hard enough, or the pass isn't flat. Well, that's exactly what you're getting when you go to the game tomorrow, that the puck that's bobbling or whatever. And then even in the summers, sometimes working with pro guys and they get a little frustrated when there's a bad pass. I'm like, if you're so, some guys you can talk to like this, we're like, you're a pro, pick it up, like get it out of your skates or knock it down. And I know they don't want, plays broken up or sessions broken up with grenades flying all over the ice, but like that's the game we live in. And you said this, like you're working on like just a lateral pass, and guys are like, no, I want it here. Well, sure, you want it there, but take it where you get it, and then find a way to get a shot off. And we can probably think of 2 or 3 shooters. It's easy to look at the NHL where they can shoot anything. It's like a baseball player, like Roberto Alomar in the old days, like anything that's hit at him, one hop, line drive, you know what I mean, hard grounder, like he's a vacuum. He's bringing that thing in. It's not getting by him, and he's probably making a play off it. Like, think of some shooters that, they have ripped some for sure as a one-timer, but maybe not as consistently, or they go through lulls. Well, I think that has a lot to do with it, and Crosby's not necessarily known as a shooter, but he's a guy that can just make a play off any puck that he gets. Ovechkin, he can shoot anything that comes his way. Like if it's front foot, back foot, he finds a way. Yeah, he looks like an unmade bed after it, and but he finds a way to get a stick on it and get it to the net. And that's what makes players to me. And that's what's like elevates them at all levels, not just like the pro level.
Yeah. And I just, just as you're saying that, I'm just recalling, and this story wasn't shared for me. It was somewhere at a talk, but it was similar to what you're talking about. Again, just using Crosby as an example, but it was Tony Granato. And I thought this always stuck out to me from a coaching perspective and how you structure drills. But it was basically that, Tony said when he was in Pittsburgh as an assistant, Crosby would grab him after practice and throughout the season. And this just makes so much sense in terms of how an elite player is so intentional, but he would pick a spot on the ice and he would pick a location at the net. And he would tell Tony, he's like, you're going to stand in this spot from here, maybe below the goal line in the corner on the strong side, and you're going to pass me 20 pucks. And I'm going to catch them and shoot them in the same spot. But then you're going to go over there, across the ice, and I'm going to catch 20
I
pucks, and I'm
love
going to
it.
hit the same thing. And he would just, and so he's like, throughout the year, like he basically knew, was like his goal was throughout the year, like I know that no matter where I'm at on the ice, I can hit any spot in the net, I can catch a puck anywhere I want. And and then you hear the same parallels with, say, like a Steph Curry, who will do the same thing and say, shoot a basket from the same spot. And it always strikes me like the best training methods would appear to be free in a lot of cases. Like it's really down to the player. Are you willing to do the simple
And
things?
and Crosby's been doing that. Like it's not like he did that early in his career. Like when did you hear that story?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well into his career, well after he already had like a prep and a junior, you know what I mean, and then a pro career. Like,
Yeah.
and he's still finding different things to do or just getting better at the things he's already overly good at. And it's just what separates those guys. And so for the guys that aren't Crosby, let's say, can they take a piece of that? For sure they can. I think some people don't know how, and I think other players don't do it just because it's kind of hard. It's kind of a pain. It's kind of a lot of work. There's kind of a lot of misses and mistakes, and it's hard mentally. You know what I mean? And I think that's our job, is to make sure players are understanding the difference. Like it's okay to miss this puck or to get it and shoot it, and it's not perfect. Just put it to that corner of the net or that side, like Crosby did. Pick a spot on the net. No matter what, I want you to settle this puck down, no matter where it comes from, no matter what it does after it hits your blade. Get control of it and find that spot on the net, because there's just an infinite number of possibilities where you're going to get it, when you're going to get it, how you're going to get it, and then what you have to do after, like in
No,
the game
absolutely.
situation. So
I'd be curious, like just given, your progression in, as a development coach, and now you're working with professionals and, players that are one step away from playing the National Hockey League. Again, I know it's tough to paint everybody with the same brush, but when it gets to the top of that pyramid, how much is the separate, or how much of the separation is pure talent, and how much of that is quote unquote learning to be a pro and just taking charge of your own development and getting yourself to that next level?
uh, man, there's so much in there. I think all these players are so good that most of them at this level, take the AHL level or even the minor, like I'll consider the minor midget, really similar to the AHL, meaning making that next jump is really, really hard. And all those players are so skilled. These minor midget kids can handle a puck, and they can, you know what I mean? They can skate and they can do these things. And then same at the pro level, obviously they've been through that. They're also good, but it's understanding who they are. It's understanding like what needs to be done at the next level to be good at the next level. In a lot of cases, what's made you successful up till now maybe isn't what you're going to be asked to do if you make the jump. And I think that's a really hard one for a lot of the players, like all these minor midget players are probably not going to be the top 3 forward, top 2 D. And that's a hard one to digest. At the pro level, same thing. You got the top D man playing the power play, maybe that's trying to make the jump that eventually, if that's their style, they'll get there. But I think it's a hard transition to what do I have to do to be successful as the bottom 3D or 2D or the bottom six forward minutes. That's really tough to understand. It's a tough pill to swallow when you're like, well, I'm a power play guy. I play a minute and a half every power play. And yeah, well, that's not what you're going to do when you make the jump to the NHL right off the hop. Some guys are lucky enough, but so I think the mental piece is like really, really tough, understanding who you are and what it's going to take to be successful where you want to go next. And then when you get there, that changes things a little bit. You got to get your pants, you got to get your stall, you get in the room, you get comfortable, you do the things the coaches want you to do. And then, okay, now how can you progress that? So get from bottom 6 to top 6 minutes, or bottom 6 to middle 6 minutes, or bottom 2 D pairing, or, even if or maybe the 6-7 flop guy on the point, meaning like you're in and out of the lineup, to a regular. Like that's a different jump now. Now you got to add consistency, and now maybe you can add a little bit more offense from the blue line, just like not diving in, but just getting shots through. Like I think that's the hardest thing for players, is that it's constantly changing for them in terms of what's going to make them successful next.
With that being said, like how much of your job, because I would think a lot of the players, say in Grand Rapids, have not all of them, but probably a lot of them. Like if we were to go back to say their minor midget year, whether they came from Europe, OHL, college, whatever, but they've probably, a lot of them on their accession has been like they've probably gone from being on the power play, maybe taking a bit of a step down, but they've always kind of been they've got used to being a key player. And I would think that a big part of this process is them, as you said, having to adapt their game. Like it is a big part of your role, helping them say, like, here's the skills that are going to translate into this role, or maybe skills that you haven't worked on since you were younger because you were working on one timers and, you know,
Yeah,
maybe
for
the more action, but now you've got to relearn some of these harder skills to be successful and make that jump.
For sure. Let me give you an example. And I'm really lucky here. One, I know you know Dwayne Blay really well, and I work directly under him on
Yeah.
the development side.
Yeah.
And have been lucky enough to work, at day to day with him for the last 14 years. So kind of he's kind of on it, full time, meaning like we'll have regular communication on what this player wants or what the big club wants, meaning Detroit, for this player. And then the assistant coaches and the head coach here in Grand Rapids are awesome. So they're the guys that are here day to day. I'll never come in and say, oh, this is what this player wants. It's a conversation piece with them. Or sorry, I won't come in and say this is what this player needs. Like it's a conversation piece. They see him every day. Hey, what do you need out of this player? What do you want? And then I'll help mold that. But as an example, there, a few weeks ago, there was a player, a D man that was playing power play, and they decided to take him off the power play, not as a punishment. He was actually playing really well, but because to make the jump, his 5-on-5 was going to have to be better. So they needed to limit his minutes so that he could really focus on his 5-on-5. Now, most players would take that as like as a demotion. You know what I mean? They'd maybe sulk or they'd pout, and they want their points and they want their power play time. This player didn't do that. He gets it. He understands, and he wants to be not just a pro. He wants to be an NHLer. And for him to be an NHLer, it wasn't, his power play time didn't need to get better right now, especially because he probably wouldn't be on the power play when he first made the jump. He needed to be more detail oriented and improve some of the, whether it was gap control or stick placement. And so I give that player a lot of credit because he was able to be like, yeah, no, that's okay. I get it. I'm obviously not happy about it. I want to play, but taking 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes of power play, depending on the game, even if it's 3 or 4 a game off, that's a lot on your body for you to just focus on those other minutes or those kill minutes, whatever. And those are the type of things that I commend players for a ton, being able to say, yep, this is what's going to work. And you also have to trust the team and the organization that they're doing the right thing for you, which this, this organization is doing that. So but that's a big one for players, is just focusing on what needs to be done to get to where you want to go, not just what makes you kind of feel good or what is the best part of the game.
Yeah. And I think I think this is so interesting to me because I sense that so much of, let's say, the National Hockey League is probably copy and paste. Like there's a salary cap. There's there's so many things that are consistent, but this is probably what you're talking about, the development side. This is the area where it's like, hey, every team gets a blank canvas, and it's like, you choose your org chart, you choose how you're going to communicate as a coaching staff, you choose how these players are going to develop, what details. And case in point, I would think that not all organizations would make a move like that to take a player off the power play for the purpose. And I can totally appreciate the trust that a player would need to say, hey, like, I need to know that you're not going to, in a month, you're not going to turn on and say, hey, you're not getting called up because you're not getting enough points. That there's a bigger picture at play. I get a chance to ask lots of coaches, say in the National Hockey League, and I probably asked Dwayne this, but what, in their view, through a coaching lens, are the things that they want players to work on, or that they recognize they need to work on most commonly to get to the next level. But I'd be curious, what do players generally come to you at and say, hey, Kevin, I want to work on this, or these are the details of my game? And that might be a part of what they think is going to get them to the next level, or just the things that they're like, just really enjoy working on this part of my game.
Mm-hmm. It's a mix of two things. One, obviously, as players and coaches, we're reactionary. You know what I mean? You struggled with this last night. Here's the video session we watched over the last 3 games, and these are the clips. So let's do that. So I think it's a mix. I don't think you can, let's take a season long plan, like in season, because out of season is very different. But you can be very reactionary, meaning, hey, we want you to play this spot, or you were been playing the right side, now you're playing the left side, so you're going to get a bunch more looks like this. But I don't think you can be fully reactionary, just putting out fires every day based on yesterday's game. I think there also has to be a long-term plan, meaning like this, we want this player to develop these things, on the as the coaching side, coming kind of from the coach's room. But for the players, like they generally, if they're coming to you, it's a lot of shooting stuff. They want to be able to get that shot off when they get it. It really is. And there will be players that come in and especially if they're coming back from injury or something, hey, I really want to do some skating stuff. The season's a real grind though. And even my personal view is skating can be touched on and you can improve little things, but I don't think skating can fully be, changed or you can really make giant changes in season. That's an out of season
Sure.
skill
Yeah,
that,
that's
like,
a good point. Yeah.
so you can touch on the way you cut back or where the puck needs to be when you cut because you're not protecting it enough. But to really change your stride or what I mean, your body position completely when you do certain thing, that's an out of season change for me. I think some guys are capable of doing it in season. Those are the really mentally detailed and dialed in guys, being able to do it a little bit off video and just like a few kind of half speed touches, things like that. But the season's such a grind. It's really hard to put your body through a ton of extra skating stuff.
Yeah. Well, so on that note, if I came to you as a player and said, "Hey, Kevin, like I haven't scored in 10 games, and I'm getting paid to score," um, how would you work? Like, what would we do on the ice? How would you get me back on track?
It depends. Is that player generating chances? Are they coughing pucks up? Are they
Okay.
working? Are they working hard enough to, what I mean,
So
to
this is
score
going
goals?
back.
Like,
There's a bit of a lot of recon
yeah,
here.
for sure. You got to look at the
Yeah. It's
video.
good.
I mean, generally when a player comes to you and says, "Hey, I haven't been scoring," they're not raising anything you don't already know. It's coming up. Coaches are talking about it, or and sometimes, and hopefully, the case is like, man, you're doing all the right things. You're playing good defensively. You're not cheating. You're getting chances. They're just not going in. Just stick with it, And it's so now as a coach, you remember when you were a player and coaches told you that, and it was like the worst thing to hear. Now you're the one saying it to them, being like, I know you don't want to hear this, but just stick with it. Keep getting pucks through. Keep it simple. You know what I mean? When there's a chance to shoot, don't make the extra play. Get it through. Now, going from there, it can be a different situation where it's like, well, you're trying way too much. You're attacking guys 1-on-2 because you want to score so bad. You know what I mean? You're turning 2-on-1s into 1-on-1s by going straight at the guy. Like, everything would be different. Oh, hey, you're not working hard enough to get to the dirty areas to get pucks. You know what I mean? Your perimeter, or you're not going to the puck, or you're not working hard enough away from it. So everything's different, but hopefully it's a situation where you're like, no, keep doing what you're doing. Let's just get lots of touches. Let's get your confidence up. Let's work a little bit before practice or after practice. These where a lot of your shots are coming from. Let's shoot a bunch from there, or let's try to generate some chances from areas that you don't normally. Meaning, like, maybe if you're getting inside the dots for a lot of shots, let's try to generate some offense from outside. It's funny how generating chances, maybe not for yourself too, can help your confidence. All of a sudden you throw one on net and there's a rebound, and that helps with confidence, even though you're not the one necessarily scoring, and then next thing you know, you're getting one yourself. So yeah, it's very, very different. But in a lot of cases, if the player's not scoring, as much as we hope it's just a tough time right now, no luck, they're probably not doing what they need to be in positions to score. And so you got to work with them there.
You know what? Like, just as you answer that, like, I wonder, I'm like, what did coaches do when there was no video? Like, what were coaches doing throughout the day, or how are they giving, I just, like, I'm like, without the video, I mean, like, they must have just been full of shit. Because and that's probably where we got, like, coaches back in the day. It was like, just work harder.
Totally, yeah. And then the coaches were like, we're talking to you, and you're like, I don't know what they're talking. I don't remember this play, or I have no
totally.
idea. Or that's totally not what I remember about this play. But okay, coach, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It's 100%. It's, I mean, you're a product of what you grew up in. We grew up in a video age, especially now coming up as coaches. So it's all we remember. But you're totally right. Like, what did we do for directions before we had in our phone, when
Go
we were
to the
driving?
net.
Like,
Put your stick on the ice.
yeah. So it's, you probably just used all the cliches for every player that came to you. and until they
Yeah.
finally something good happened for them.
What when you look at, back home in London when you're running your academy and you're getting these kids, and obviously your group there, you're not focused on wins and losses, you're following a development plan throughout the season. It's the tail end of January now. Imagine most of those kids with their club teams playoffs are around the corner. What would the focus be on your seasonal plan at this stage?
Right now, we'll start to tailor it back, at the end of January, because they will come into their end of their seasons in February for most of them, playoffs coming up. So tailor it back, meaning like not going to change anything. Not that we're always changing things, but it'll be a little less detail oriented, a little more touches, maintenance. They're going to play, even weekday games in some cases more just because playoffs and stuff. So more touches and kind of bigger concepts rather than, really breaking down someone's skating. Now, I mentioned earlier, like, skating in season, maybe not being able to really change things. And I was meaning more on like a pro or junior type of setting, a team setting. In this academy case, we do feel like we can make some of those changes very delicately, because we don't want players drastically changing things, from one day to the next. But because we're lucky enough to see them on the ice, 3-4 times a week, we can get some touches on them. And when we don't have to worry about team stuff, we can get some touches and make some subtle changes to maybe the way they, will spend a lot of time in small areas. So the way they come out of turns, the way they take off, you know what I mean? What's happening their first 3 steps out of something, even their stride, a bit. We have a skating treadmill, so we'll get on there with them a bit. But yeah, it'll be bigger concepts right now. And then really start to key in. We'll be lucky enough after the season's done to have a couple months. So for those kids, that starts their off season, where they can raise, hey, you really need to get faster if you're going to make the jump from AA to AAA next year. And tryouts are coming up, because right after their seasons in Ontario,
Yeah, you
tryouts
guys do
also
it
come up.
backwards
So
in Ontario. Yeah, you do tryouts
I did
like the week
not.
after the season's done, basically. Is that
In
accurate?
some cases, yeah, depending on how, it makes no sense to me at all. It really doesn't. Like, how can you expect a kid to spend time improving, getting better at the things you just told them? You know what I mean? Hey, I want you to improve on this for next year, when they have 6 days to do that, or
Yeah.
less in some cases. It doesn't make sense to me. I think kids should get a chance to be off the ice for a while, and then get a chance to do development and get better, and then get a chance to try out, in some way like that. And I know it's easier said than done, but it just doesn't make sense.
No, amen. I'm with you on that one, but I know it's
It's a touchy
if it was
subject.
anywhere else but Ontario, there'd be a chance of it changing, but not when it's Ontario. It's they got their own way, or you guys got your own way. Um, as you've gone through your career, I'm always curious about this. Like, there's so many details, and I think we see it every day. I mean, just as much as easy as it would be to assume that, you know, players have been skating for, 100 years now, that we kind of know everything about it. Like, there's just always new information. There's different teaching cues, different mechanics. I mean, I think just in the last 15 years, the emphasis on like outside edge work has, it been greatly enhanced, and, such a focus on that. But as you've gone through your career as a coach, how have you maybe documented, or as you kind of learn about these different details or certain progressions, certain skills, like how have you captured that to sort of build up your coaching toolbox, or is it all between the ears?
It's between the ears in a lot of cases. We're lucky enough to have a good network in London, with a few like-minded guys that all work together. Obviously, starting with Dwayne, who started TPH so long ago, and now I've got a couple other guys that we work together. So we're lucky enough to have a really unique, office where we can just throw ideas off each other, or agree on things, disagree on things, talk about things. But definitely, when I look at development, let's say, and where how differently I'm doing things from 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, it's because I think kids are getting so much of those, I'm going to call them static skills. So just edge work, just stick handling. It's just shooting. It's very specific to the actual skill, and not because I don't believe those are important. I used to find myself doing a lot more of that stuff, because it obviously you gotta be skilled to play, but the players are getting it now. They're going in all different directions, and getting 3 different coaches. So they're getting so much of that stuff that I just now am, unless somebody comes in and really wants that stuff, exclusively teaching the game, as much as I can to all levels, even little young kids. It's teaching, more about the actual game than it is the, how to do it how to stop inside the game. And not because that's not important. It's just, I don't find, especially in our area, there's really many people teaching that side of it. So we're yeah, I don't have a documented, this is what we focused on in this year and this year and this year. It's just basically getting a chance to, work together collectively and say, this is what we're seeing. And so I think we should really, really tailor what we're offering to this, because it's just players aren't getting enough of it.
You went to the coaching factory, also known as the University of Alabama, Huntsville.
Yeah.
Which, man, I'm starting to feel like there's a 30 for 30 doc brewing out of all the players that have, carved out careers, whether it's Jay Woodcroft, you obviously mentioned Dwayne Blaze, and Steve Briere as well, goalie coach for the Kraken. Like, there's just seems to be, I don't know what was going on in the dorm rooms there, but I just feel like you guys on Friday nights were, moving chess pieces around and figuring out forechecks. How much is just that network or mentorship? How influential has that been on your career? Just having some people in and around the game to, I'm sure, learn from, but also be able to pick up the phone and solve problems as you encounter them.
Totally. I mean, I think at first, I think probably it's because none of us were at like a really legit school where we thought we were going to be a player. We enjoyed our career, but we
Yeah.
realized pretty quick we were going to have to, veer off into another direction and coach. But yeah, it's been great. I don't know Jay personally. I just know his name. Dwayne talks extremely high. Him and his brother,
Yeah.
both of them. He talks extremely high about both of them. I know Steve was the goalie coach when I was actually there as a player. So definitely. Yeah. So he was there the first year or two, I think, 2 years, I believe. And yeah, so definitely run into him every now and then. And he was in Toronto there for a few years before Seattle. So saw him a little more often then, but I feel very fortunate. I think back to like right before I started doing this, and I was still a player. I did not know this could be your job. Like, I genuinely did not know this could be your job. And that was 14 years ago, like not that long ago.
How did you get into it then?
Because of Dwayne, I never played with Dwayne.
Yeah.
We met in Huntsville. I would stay every summer and work there and take classes and things. And he was down there running some stuff, and we met. And then I was living, about an hour away. I was playing in Europe, and somebody connected us. Was like, hey, why don't you go to work for Dwayne in the summer? And so I did that for one summer. And then the next summer I was like, oh man, it's kind of a long drive. He's like, oh, just come stay with me for the summer and work for me. I'm like, okay. So then I just stayed with him the next summer, and I was going to go back to Europe. And he was just like, hey, we're thinking about doing this and expanding and buying a training center. And would you think about sticking around? And I was like, stick around for what? Like, stick around and do what? And he's like, well, do this full time. And we have all this stuff going on. So yeah, that's how it happened. And then that was 14 years ago that he brought it to me. It's not like I was hounding him. I didn't really realize that it could be what it is now. And I mean, I owe all the credit to him. I think there's a lot of people that are great players, NHL players, that probably just do things really well, couldn't coach it. And I was not a high end player by any means, but like, I had no idea how to teach this stuff. I took it out of his book and stole, was lucky enough to be under his kind of tutelage for so long that I, came up with my own ideas and stuff, but was lucky to just come up under him. And then having those other resources like Briere, and even though he's a goalie guy, just having people that want to shoot the breeze about hockey, like like sometimes, like I'm sure if we got in a room together, we could pass 6 hours in a heartbeat and just talk about everything under the sun.
Yeah, no. It like I said, I think it's, and I think in particular, just the lens that you see the game through, because how would I describe this? I think so much of what a lot of coaches do, particularly in the National Hockey League, is they set the framework and they say, hey, the rest of you got to fit into this, and you better figure it out, or we're going to find somebody else who will. Where I think you're on that other side of it, and it's like, hey, we got to help. We recognize that there's every player is built differently, and we got to be able to see what are the one or two things that they have to adjust in their game. What tools do we need to give them so they can fit into that framework? And
Totally.
I sense too that the relation, like I think I could be off on this, but my sense is that coaches in your role have to walk this really fine line where on one hand they don't want to not share information with the head coach or other information, but the other on the other side they also have to have a relationship of trust where it's like, hey, that player might need to go to you and say, I think the coach is an asshole, and I just maybe there's not, but maybe it's just as much of letting the player vent and just knowing that they
Totally.
have a safe place they can go to, and sort of, I'm sure when you talk about trust, that plays as much into it as anything. If players are going to buy into what you're selling.
I was just going to say exactly what you said. Like a player won't get better unless they want to get better. At any level, they just won't. You can throw them on
Yeah.
the ice. I mean, I can have a piano, but if I'm banging my keys with hockey gloves on, then I could be there for 10,000 hours. It won't make any difference. And it's no difference with development. Even I'll tell parents all the time, your kid was on the ice 7, 8 times this week. They don't listen. You know what I mean? Or they're not dialed in because they're kind of checked out. They get the same instructions, or it's 4 different coaches, so different instructions. Like less would be more. In a lot of cases, like even the
Yeah.
10,000 puck challenge, I love it. It's motivating. Coaches give it to their
Whoa,
players.
what's the
It's never
10,000
bad.
buck challenge?
Well, like throw. It's the whole like 10,000
10,000
hours,
hours. Yeah. Yeah.
10,000 pucks, 1,000 puck, whatever. Motivate your players for sure. But I would love to see like, hey, show us how you're shooting. If you're shooting 1,000, could it be better with 100? Depends on how you shot that 1,000. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It really does. If you go downstairs again, I'm not taking away from it. If you're motivating your players to get a stick in their hands, get a puck in their hands, it's great. But you tell your son or daughter to go downstairs and shoot, and they shoot 100 pucks, and they're back upstairs in 3 minutes. Probably could have just shot a few less and focused on a few details on what their body was doing. So it's the detail part of what you're doing that's more important than just being on the ice 7 times and 8 times. And as far as the trust part, like I said, you can't make them better if they don't want to. So they have to want to. That player needs to be on the ice and want to get better. And at the pro level, the junior level, getting there, I think the coaches understand. I know the coaches understand that I'll come to them if a player tells me something and it needs to be shared. But it's more important for that player to trust me and be able to talk to me in confidence, as long as it's not detrimental to the team, or you know what I mean, of course.
For sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's huge. They got to know that we all have their best interest in heart, namely, the guy that's working one-on-one with them.
And I think, I think so much of that too is just, particularly with probably the head coach, is just them having um, maybe less enough of an ego to understand that not everything has to flow through them. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
benefit in just trusting people, and,
Totally. Yeah.
that it's, probably good organizations function when, there's some things that are left unsaid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that goes all the way down to, you were talking about being a little bit maybe pliable. I think that's what I took from what you were saying in terms of the way you view development. Like I think that if you look at some development coaches, it's like, this is the way, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, and everybody has to do it this way. I'm not like that. I think everybody's different. And I think, I love talking to coaches that I disagree with just as much as I like talking to coaches that I agree with, whether it's a coach on a team thing or a skill thing. It's there's no such thing as a wrong way to do it. And I think sometimes, especially on the development side, we see so much on YouTube and Instagram that's like, this is it, this is right, this is wrong. And I
Yeah.
think we have to manage what we see that way, or what we're letting our players see, or our son or daughter see, or not manage what they see, but manage what they're taking away from it. When we're like, yep, that's a really good idea, and that can be called that, or it can be this, or on entry we don't do this. This isn't the play, it's a play. You know what I mean? On retrieval, it's not the play, it's a play. So
Yeah. I I totally agree with you. And I think the other part that gets missed, because I'll see it just even like I coach my little guys team, and coaches will, their parents will come up and say, hey, I saw this drill on YouTube, Instagram, whatever. And it's a great drill. Like there's a zillion great drills out there. But I'm always like, okay, that's great. But the nuance of that is there was some steps before that, before this was even applicable. And we might need to focus on that aspect. And I think that so much of like, I get worried sometimes, like more, and to the same point of like the comment you made about being on the ice 7 days a week necessarily isn't better. But I think having a clear understanding of like, hey, like get really good at this one thing. And then, understanding that this is you got years, the runway's years for most of these kids. And I think sometimes they're trying to get it all done by the end of August. And
and
maybe
even
that's not the most productive way
totally,
of it.
and like even drill. What's a drill? I don't have a better word for it. I honestly think of it, but like, what's a drill? Is it drill one player? Is it two players? Is it three players moving? Is you know what I mean? Is there a forward and a D? Like, I don't know. It's what's in, and I say this till I'm blue in the face. I don't know the last time I had a session where I didn't say it. Where like, stop doing the drill and play the game. What's happening inside that drill that's making is it making useful? Can a drill be skating straight down the ice and getting a pass and shooting? Sure. Obviously not maybe in a team setting, but in a skill session, that can be a drill, that can be a setup.
But you and I could run that same drill skating on the ice and shooting, and it could be totally different. A player could get two totally different messages,
which is amazing. That's the best part of it. And you're focusing on maybe completely different details than I am. Or we have completely different setups for the drill, but we're actually focusing on the same details. Like, it's really cool that way. I think the problem is we get into just the patterns and the sequences where that becomes more important.
I was just going to say that. Like, my fear is some coaches think their job in the drill was just to get the player to skate around the pylon, and they're like, okay, mission accomplished. Yeah.
And for sure, when the kids are young and you want to get them using both feet, and you know what I mean, there's a time and a place for it. But when we're really looking at those details, and like even look at like passing and movement, every coach wants their team to play faster and make more passes and get more shots and offense and get out of their zone quicker and all those things. That's great. So what do? We didn't move our feet. So generally, what's next practice? Flow practice. You know what I mean? And it's four guys on a blue line or hash marks or corner or wherever everyone's set up, and it's like zipping it here, zipping it there. There's a time and a place for that. You want to work on getting pucks and getting them off your stick and get your feet. There's a time and a place. Don't get me wrong. But then you get to, the game tomorrow night and you're like, well, we couldn't make a single pass. Well, yeah, but the drill was never you were trying to play better tomorrow based on a flow drill with no pressure, where you knew every route you were going to take, where the puck came from, what you did with it next, you know what I mean? You knew every single detail in the drill. Well, tomorrow night, you don't know one thing. You don't know when you're going to get it, where you're going to get it, how long you're going to have with it. Is it going to be behind you? And then, so we can't use that flow drill as an indicator that we're going to make more passes next game. We can use that as like a good, like get our legs going and get everyone a bunch of touches. And we just have to monitor what are we doing and what's the desired outcome of what we're doing.
Yeah. It's so funny. I think conversations like these, you realize like there's just, as far as we've come, there's just an infinite amount of room to improve or adjust. And, there's always a way to get 1% better. Kevin, if you had a chance, if you had a time machine, you could go back and talk to yourself 14 years ago when you were getting started. What advice would you give yourself as you embarked on a career as a development coach?
I would, if anything, I was probably a little too, exactly what I talked about a couple minutes ago. I was a little too, black and white, X and O. This is it, and this is the way you do it here, and this is the way you do it here. This is what you do here. You know what I mean? And this is the way you skate, and this is the way you shoot. I think that's a little more how skill development was, and I would probably be a little, not lackadaisical is not the word, probably a little more open to different styles, different things. Different methods of teaching, different methods of learning. You know what I mean? Just be a little more open-minded to a lot of things. And that came with time, partly. And that also came with what we talked about before, having a really, an office full of like-minded people that we got talking to each other. And then, over years being like, well, maybe that's not the only way you shoot, or that's not exactly where everyone's hands need to be, where they get the puck. You know what I mean? Because they're a little taller, or they're not as flexible, or they're coming off a shoulder injury and they can't get their hand, up here. Like, so I think that's probably one of the biggest thing for me is I was a little probably hard nosed on like right and wrong 14 years ago, trying to establish myself and things like that. And now I realize like, I don't actually care about that. I just want to help the player. And so if this works for that player, let's work the problem and find out how how we can, one, get them to do it here in this session, and then two, get them to do it tomorrow night in the game.
How do you, just be curious, like, so when you work with a player, let's say it's in Grand Rapids, and obviously some of the skills may not be skills that necessarily translate on the score sheet. You talk about, measuring if things are working. Like, how do you go about, let's say, for example, it was picking up pucks on picking up rims on the wall, for example. Like, how do you go about helping a player analyze that, if they're progressing in the right direction, and then also just, how much of your job is finding ways to give pats on back for things that maybe could easily go unrecognized by other members of the coaching staff?
So much. There's really not that much that goes unrecognized by them. You know what I mean? They're here every day, as you can imagine. They're watching every shift, every period, every game over and over. So when I come in and I see all games, and I'll go back and watch on certain players, especially some of the guys that are young or old, but the guys that are really interested. I know that, hey, when I get there next week or later this week, they're really going to want to work on some things. But it always starts with the coaches. What do you see? What do you want? What do you like? What do you not like? What do you think of this player? For one, they're watching it from the bench, and I'm watching it either, like tonight, for instance, I'll be watching it from top row, you know what I mean, up top. And this weekend I'll be watching from home on a live feed. So I will maybe have a bit of a different opinion than them, and ultimately it's their opinion for sure. But I'll go to them first and say, what do you think? This is what I think. And then go to the player, say, hey, what do you think? This is what we think, and then work with them.
For sure. That's great. And that's really good advice, because I also think that in this, call it an industry, especially where players, some of the amateur level now, I think even at the professional level, they have like their private coaches, is, man, when there's not alignment from the coach and the skills coach, and a young player is getting two different messages, like, that's not a great recipe for success either. It doesn't mean that anybody's right or wrong, but it just means you put yourself in the player's shoes. If somebody's saying pass and somebody's saying, chip it, that's, now we're thinking a little too hard in the game.
And that's where it goes back to, like, pass is the right play sometimes. Chip it is the right play sometimes. Hold on to it is, it's more, what can we do right before that pass to help make sure they make the right decision after, and then there'll be tendencies to say, hey, you love to do this here, no problem, but don't over, don't, if there's a chance to make a play, make a play. You don't have to just chip it because you're a bottom bottom line guy and they want you to get on the forecheck. You can make a play if you can make a play, if it's not high risk, and you know what I mean, you're not the last guy, like, whatever it is. I think it's just, some players also get wired a little bit to, like, no, this is who I am. This is what's going to make me successful.
That's a really well said. Yeah, that's a great point.
And we're not trying to take, a bottom line guy and get him on the power play tomorrow night by having him dance, walk through three players. That's not what I'm talking about. But just, hey, you would normally chip this, but there's a chance just to change the angle of it, get it on net. And so I think sometimes players like, yeah, I know, but I don't want to do that. Coach keeps telling me to get it deep, especially at the minor hockey level. I'm like, yep, do what your coach says. I'll never go against what a coach says most of the time, especially, I'm lucky enough here to be in the coach's room and hear directly from their mouth. But if I'm, they take the academy players, if I'm working with them on something, I haven't talked to, I wish more coaches would reach out, and I always open up the door for them to say, hey, these guys, you see him play more than I do. What do you want? Can he not pick up a pass? Does he not open up for pucks? Like I wish I could hear from the coaches more, and if a player's talking to me like, oh, coach gave me trouble for doing this or do that, I'm like, well, I don't know if I wasn't there, but just in this situation, do what the coach says ultimately, but maybe there's options to do this at the right times.
Well, I think great segue, because, you're going to be presenting at our Global Skills Showcase. And I think what's really valuable, or what we've come to appreciate is really valuable about this event, is that it helps maybe some of the coaches that aren't familiar with some of those little details that go within a system, a neutral zone forecheck, be it angling, whether it's a players catch a pass, that when they start to understand what those building blocks are, it's maybe easier to reach out and be more specific, because otherwise it's just like, Johnny's not scoring enough, or gosh, he's not fast enough. And it's like, okay, well, give me like what specifically is it? And it maybe helps them, better appreciate that when there's a problem, that if we can identify what the actual problem is, there's a better opportunity to maybe solve it. So on that, like, what are you going to be, fill us in on what you're going to be presenting on, and what coaches can look forward to.
I'm going to be talking about decision makings and how we can help influence our players, or help develop our players' decision making skills. Now that's super broad. Obviously, ultimately, we can't be like, hey, you should shoot on this 2-on-1, pass on this 2-on-1. As great as that would be, hey, there's a guy coming behind you. As great as that would be, it's essentially there's no magic solution to it. The more players are aware, the more they're going to be able. The more info they have, the better chance they have of making the right play. Or I shouldn't say the right play, a positive play, the play,
Yes.
play. You know what I mean? My opinion of a technically there is the right play to always turn away from pressure. Maybe in theory, but should you cut to pressure sometimes? For sure. Even though you think like, hey, you're coming on me, and as a coach, you're like, no, you got to cut away from pressure. No, okay, your decision was to cut to pressure. Sure. What did you do next? Did you skate out of it? Did you move the puck right away? Did you move your feet right away? Like, it's okay. If that was your decision, then these are the skills we have to couple with that decision to make it successful, to make it happen. Because there's just no way to say this is the right decision to make crossing the blue line. This is the right decision to make on the rim. You know what I mean? Off a pass on your back. There's just no way to do that. There's, as we talked about earlier on, there's an infinite amount of possibilities where the pressure is, how much puck's spinning, where you are on the ice. Like, there's thousands. So I'd rather say, okay, this is your decision here. First of all, why'd you make it? And then what are you doing to make that successful? You know what I mean? Was it a cut to make a pass? Was it a cut to dump it deep? Was it a cut to skate out of it? You know what I mean? And keep possession, or just a cut to protect it under pressure? Sure. Great play. What do you do next? What's coming up next? And that's a really, really open-ended, broad way to do it. So I'll probably keep it pretty general in terms of like, this is hockey's hockey. Yes, there's a ton of decisions as forwards and as D and as goalies, but we'll just keep it just general in this case, in terms of like, hey, in a certain situation, we're all hockey players. What decision you make? What do you do next? Okay, then what do you do? Because as we know, unless it goes in the net, over the glass, or there's a whistle, every time you do something, you got to do something else. And then there's something else. And then there's something else. So.
Well, I'll tell you what, here's why I think your presentation is so important. And this is, and I would say probably literally like just mostly this year, I've had so many conversations with, be it, coaches in the National Hockey League, coaches who I think are eventually going to be coaching in that league. And they've connected the dots that giving players the freedom to make decisions and having less constraints, their gut feel is that that's a better way to do it. It's incredibly hard. And they're trying to wrap their heads around, like, how do I do this in a way that I feel like this is the best way to do it? How do I get comfortable letting go of the reins a little bit? And how do I do so in a way where it's not going to affect my job? So I think and it's so funny because that's what other feedback I get is they're like, I know this is the best way to do it, but I'm also going to be graded on how we do this weekend. And I realize I need some runway here to bring this to life. So I think just, your presentation's very timely. It's really important. And I think more than anything, and I've had a little bit of a preview of it, but I think what's going to happen is it's really going to spark, with the right coaches, a lot of curiosity, and probably the philosophy is probably going to expand well beyond just practice, but it might shift maybe their overall philosophy on how they teach, how they coach. Kevin, before we let you go, again, because you get to work with obviously a lot of high-end pros, but you're also working in the trenches and in grassroots hockey, what would be your sort of general piece of advice to say, hey, coaches out there, here's maybe something that you should be paying more attention to, or a skill or tactic that you would say, hey, spend more time on this and you might get some better results on the scoreboard?
I think two major things. One is, and you hear this all the time, it's easy to say, not easy to do, even in skill settings. because there's so many eyes on us as coaches, but like just enjoy the process a little bit, have fun with it. Drills that aren't perfect, don't look great, are super useful. It's okay if it's not, it's okay if it's not beautiful, whether it's an individual session with a player or a drill, it's really okay. What are we doing out of that? Have fun with it. Games and drills that aren't going well. Those are all great learning opportunities, and that was, I alluded to that earlier, where I was like, I was probably too rigid early in my, when I first started, where I was too worried about the look of it, or, and just less worried about the process, let's say. So that's one thing. Enjoy it, and whatever's happening, just be a little reactionary in terms of like, yeah, we can learn from this. It's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect all the time. And the other thing is the awareness piece is just, shoulder checking, whatever everyone's calling it. If you got a new word for it, call it that. Doesn't matter to me. It's just, it can't be understated. There's just really no reason to ever do a drill that doesn't have something like that involved in it. The same drill you've done because it's your Wednesday drill. Great.
And just clarifying, you mean like just getting players to look, to be aware of their surroundings within the drill?
Yeah. Okay. You could, if you're skating for 6 seconds, if you're doing a warm-up drill, there's just no reason that a player should get the puck at the red line, skate to the hash marks in the middle of the ice, and then rip bar down. And that's what these 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds are doing. Like, why not add a little pressure somewhere? Why not even get them to skate down the ice and look like they're going to make a pass, even though no one's there? Well, how are they going to sell that in a game? If, can we add those things in practice?
Love it.
That would be it. We're doing all kinds of skill development, but we're maybe not. There's really subtle ways to add it into practice that will have bigger benefits than actually going to that D session, actually going to that, skill session per se, because someone like me or you is harping on a guy in this session, but in practice, we sometimes just get into the flow of things, and we're just kind of not going through the motions in a bad way, just like trying to keep practice moving, and that, like I said, that same drill that you do all the time, could it start with a rim? Sure. Why not? Could it just start facing the wrong way, where you got to get the puck, look, turn, and then start the drill? Why not? Our players won't just look when they go pick up the puck because you're yelling at them from the bench. They have to do that so much that it becomes automatic for them. And then you can build off that. Can we add evasiveness off that look? So have fun with the process. And enjoy it. Things that are ugly can be very, very good. And then the second thing is just really, doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be skill development practices. Like, this is a skill practice. Why can't it just be a normal practice with a little bit of skill in it? Just like, hey guys, that same drill that we do all the time? Great. Yeah. Let's just add this one thing. Perfect. And it also gets the guys to engage a little bit, meaning like they're not just going through the motions in the same drill that they've done. They got to think about something. They got to focus on one extra little piece of it, which is great, because we can't control the situation in a game. So let's try to take a little bit of the control out of practice.
Love it. It's a great advice. Great way to close. Kevin, we're pumped to see your presentation here at the beginning of March. And in the meantime, good luck to you, the Griffins, I guess indirectly the Wings, and everybody else you're working out with in London.
Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it.